Washington became this week the unexpected crossroads of Eurasian diplomacy as President Donald Trump welcomed the leaders of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan for the first ever C5+1 summit at the White House. The geopolitical echoes were unmistakable. The discussions signaled an American ambition to rebalance influence in a region long dominated by Moscow and increasingly shaped by Beijing's Belt and Road projects. For Central Asia, the invitation to Washington carried both opportunity and risk, a new chapter of multipolar competition unfolding over trade, security and technology. But beneath the handshakes and press statements lies a deeper question. How will the US manage this delicate geopolitical puzzle to counterbalance Russia and China's long-standing presence? The episode explores this critical moment in global strategy. Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The U.S. under President Trump hosted leaders from 5 Central Asian nations in a strategic move to challenge Moscow and Beijing's dominance in the region. According to the New York Times, Central Asia, rich in vital minerals and energy resources, has historically been under Russia's influence, but increasingly courted by China. Trump's outreach aims to create alternatives to Russian and Chinese economic control by fostering new partnerships and trade routes that bypass these powers. This includes signing a cooperation deal on critical minerals with Kazakhstan, enhancing U.S. access to essential resources, while Russia and China maintain strong economic and political ties to Central Asia. These nations seek to diversify their options. The U.S. effort signals an intent to assert greater influence in a geopolitically crucial area and intensifying great power competition. The U.S. Central Asia Summit held in Washington marked a significant milestone in a decades-long C5+1 diplomatic platform connecting the U.S. with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. EurasiaNet stated that the summit focused on practical cooperation, especially in critical minerals vital for U.S. supply chains, regional connectivity and security. Central Asian nations eager to diversify beyond Russia and Chinese influence see the summit as an opportunity to expand partnership and assert their agency. While major breakthroughs were not expected due to the summit's short notice, the U.S. aimed to move beyond symbolism towards concrete deals and ongoing dialogue. The event signifies a new chapter in U.S. Central Asia relations, positioning the region as a proactive geopolitical actor balancing greater powers. As Washington's engagement with Central Asia takes a new turn, analysts are asking whether this summit represents a tactical move or a beginning of a lasting strategic realignment. The U.S. promises investments and diversification of supply chains, yet the region remains tethered to both Russian security, architecture, and Chinese economic gravity. To unpack these competing forces, we're joined tonight by Mark Toth, a national security and foreign policy expert based in Washington, and Chu Xuan, a journalist and Chinese affairs expert from Dubai. Together, they'll help us assess whether this summit signals a new balance of power or maybe another round in the great game of influence. Welcome to you both. Let's start off with you, Mr. Toth. Now, how significant is this first ever C5+1 summit for Washington's strategic agenda? Mr. Toth, are you with us?
Yeah, I am with you, but someone is talking over you in the studio, so I could not hear your question. Greetings to you, though.
Thank you for joining us. Let me repeat my question for you. How significant is the first ever C5+1 summit for Washington's strategic agenda, and what are the immediate objectives for the summit?
There's a lot of messaging going on here from Washington. It may just appear to be a summit that's focused on Central Asia, but it certainly has implications in other regions. Let me touch on Central Asia first. I think Trump realizes that 34 years now since the Soviet Union fell apart and these countries gained their independence, they're realizing now that Russia represents a military threat to them. They can see what's happening in Ukraine. They've seen what's happened in Georgia and Chechnya in the past. And likewise, they can see what Beijing is attempting to do to Taiwan. And so they need options. They want outs. They want leverage. And I think they are looking at the U.S. of saying, hey, we can look to you for partnership. We need economic investment. And so from their standpoint, it's a good thing. From Washington's standpoint, we need rare earth minerals, those 17 key vital minerals that are used for a lot of high-tech manufacturing, but also have military applications to them. So that's one thing. But then there's also two other connections here. There's the messaging to Putin about Venezuela. Look, we can reach deep into Central Asia, a former sphere of influence for you, which is a counter to what he's doing in Venezuela with Maduro, he being Putin. And then also it's a key extension of the Abraham Accords amongst the Arab nation states in your own region of the world, where Trump is attempting to attach that region to economic development that would benefit both regions, the Middle East and there. So I would argue, to answer your question very succinctly, very significant.
Okay, Mr. Shun, if we can get your take here. How are Central Asian leaders viewing this invitation to Washington? Is it for them, as Mr. Toth said there, a form of diversification and a way to get out from under, Chinese and Russian alignment as well?
I think actually the U.S. currently thinks in having the summit between the U.S. and the Central Asia countries to combat the implications, Chinese consequences in Central Asia. I think there is another round of the summit between China and the Central Asia countries in the upcoming period, and Central Asia is very important for China as it's keen on developing economic and political ties with the neighborhood countries, and also to developing or enhancing the relations in this regard. I think the Central Asia countries is one of the most important pillars in the joint communication, and this initiative it doesn't help on enhancing infrastructure in Central Asian countries, and also polarizing more employment opportunities. I think China and the Central Asian countries will benefit from this initiative, and I think it's very important not only for China and Central Asia and countries only, but also to many other countries. For example, through the initiative, they can link the economic and trade channels to other countries in West Asian and Central Africa and even Europe, and I think this is important. And I think China aims at building a value that is not only restricted to economic and trade fields only, but also protecting the security. We know that all Central Asian countries are cooperating and with the organization of OECD to combat extremism and separation, which is very important in this area. And we know that the US currently aims at embracing the Chinese develop growth and also geopolitically. So I think China seeks enhancing bilateral relations with Central Asian countries to help protecting its geopolitical, economic, and other interests in the region. This is my point of view.
Okay, Mr. Toth, I'm sure you heard Mr. Chon there talking about this summit, and it's not necessarily something that the Chinese will view as counterintuitive to their alliances with these Central Asian countries. Do you believe this is true, and it's something that the Chinese look forward to, further cooperation with other nations as well?
Yeah, look, understandably, given that this is a great power competition here, if you will, in the Central Asian area, certainly Beijing has its intentions. It's been historically, going all the way back to the Silk Road, but now more recently as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a key path, a key avenue, not just for the rich rare earth minerals that are there in that region, for instance, like uranium in Kazakhstan, but also all the way into Europe, and then ultimately the heart of Western Europe itself. It's a key pathway. So China certainly wants to see it develop, but obviously would prefer, if you're in Beijing, to see it develop under the influence of Xi and his government. The U.S., on the other hand, wants to view this as a means of opening up that region, not just to counterbalance Russian aggression in the area in terms of Ukraine and elsewhere, and to deter that in the future, but also to get at these rare earth minerals because there is a conflict going on between Beijing.
So would you say that this is some form of reset under the Trump administration to how they deal with Central Asian countries?
It is. Look, if you look at how abrupt this meeting came about, this wasn't something that was forecast that far in advance. It tells you that Trump's reacting to a couple of things. One of it was the rare earth minerals conflict that at least temporarily got solved, where China agreed to postpone for a year the new restrictions that they were going to put into place. So Trump is scrambling. He's looking for new means to do rare earth minerals. Now, just real quickly, rare earth minerals, it's a bit tricky because they're not as rare as it sounds. What's rare is the difficulty in extracting them. It's a long process. It's not an environmentally friendly practice. And then just the actual refinement of them, the manufacturing of them is what takes a long time. And China very clearly has a monopoly in that area. They've, not just in Central Asia, but in their own country, but as well as what they've been able to accomplish in Africa in terms of securing these rare earth minerals, in terms of the extraction and in terms of their refinement back inside of China. So this is what Trump is after at a big level. But then there's also the added level where he's trying to marry these two regions for investment purposes with the Mideast as part of the Abraham Accords. So that aspect is going on. And then there's just some symbolic messaging that's going on to Putin that, look, if you can reach into Venezuela, as you've been doing since Hugo Chavez was in power, we're going to do the same to you in Central Asia, a former region that was under the Soviet Union up until 1991.
Okay, Mr. Juan, if we can get your take here. Now, has the summit changed the way regional elites weigh their relations when it comes to Russia and China? I'm sure you heard Mr. Toth there talking about how the Americans are trying to show the Russians, at least in part, that, we can reach deep into your regional reach.
I think China is keen on enhancing the relationships with Russia and Central Asia. We know when we tackle the relationship between Russia and China is a strategic coordination between two countries, and I think this is one of the highest levels of bilateral relation with China and other countries. China is keen on developing relationships with Russia culturally, and economically, and politically, and others. And in regards to developing the countries with Central Asian countries, I think China aims at protecting its interest in this regard, and I think this is very important. In regards to China, in regards to especially in energy and security and other fields, and this doesn't impact relationships between them because China has a kind relationship with Russia, and China has good relations with Central Asia as well. And also China has good relations with Central Asian countries, and I think in this regard, I think the geopolitical factors are very important to find greater interest in regards to China and Russia and Central Asian countries to benefit this mechanism, the cooperation mechanism between among these countries. And we know that these countries are part of Shanghai Organization for Cooperation that became an important platform not only for dialogue but will play a positive role especially in protecting peace and stability and development with other fields, with other countries, and there were some contributions made to preserve peace in the whole world. And I think China seeks on enhancing relations with these countries, the neighborhood countries. And in regards to the relationships with China and Russia, there is an immediate meeting with Trump, with the president, the Chinese president, and his American counterpart. And it's a very important meeting after 5 rounds of economic and trade negotiations between two parties. And of course, I think China doesn't want to involve in the trade war with the U.S., so it seeks on normalized relations
Well,
with
sir,
the U.S.
if I can just cut you off there and like follow up on what you're saying, China is not interested in a trade war. Obviously, they want to do business with anyone who's willing to do business. But we're seeing now that the Americans are, as we've seen with the summit, attempting to better the relations with these Central Asian countries, and they also signed an agreement with the Japanese for rare earth minerals. Do you think that this could affect doing business in China when it comes to the rare earth minerals?
We know that China has rare earth minerals with a huge amount, but China used to put constraints on importing these minerals to protect its security, and U.S. always seeks on embracing the Chinese development and growth. There is negotiations between two parties for a long time, but every time I think the U.S. doesn't comply with its words, any agreement between two parties. But after a few months, the U.S. started to impose constraints on and tariffs as well on China. In this regard, China will preserve its legitimate interests with all measures necessary to the issue, and I think exporting rare earth minerals is part of that. And as I said previously, China wants to enhance relations, but this is based on mutual respect and peace, mutual peace, and joint files. So if the U.S. committed or complies to these bases, of course, we will witness more enhancement in bilateral relationship between China and the U.S. So.
Okay, Mr. Toth, as you've heard there, Mr. Chuan was talking about the idea that China is not really interested in a trade war per se. But part of the competitiveness of the U.S. right now is about the rare earth minerals. How critical is it for the U.S. agenda to gain the rare earth minerals? And do you think that the tariffs and this trade war, so-called trade war between the U.S. and China, is over rare earth minerals?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot to impact there. First off, look, the U.S. clearly is playing a catch-up game. Credit Beijing. They did a good job in terms of getting control over the accessible rare earth minerals at this point and the refinement of them, and they have a lead there, and the U.S. has to catch up. So a lot of that, I think, is what you're seeing here in terms of this quick meeting, given that this has flared up yet again, where because of the greater tariff war that's happening between Trump in Beijing, that it's understandably China's fighting back, saying that we possibly, are going to use rare earth minerals to fight against any kind of imposition of tariffs that Trump is doing. So, at one level, it's a strategic issue for the U.S. in terms of how to get access for military purposes, especially, but also our own manufacturing base, these rare earth minerals. But also, it's a tool in a trade war that Trump is wanting to take. There are many people here in the U.S. that don't think a trade war with China is a good thing, and that tariffs are self-defeating. There are others that think it does. But Trump's the president, so he's the one that's making those decisions. But I would just quickly add to our esteemed host, because I think you hit it exactly on the head. When you talked about diversification, I don't think we can overlook the 5 Central Asian countries themselves and what they're trying to get out of this. When you look at historically to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, who have always looked at it as a regional first basis, what can they do to strengthen it? And then you look at the improving relationships, the close relationships amongst these 5 presidents. Even back in May of 2025 of this year, you had Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan solving their border disputes. So they clearly want to start to exert themselves on the global stage, and that means diversifying access to military hardware to protect themselves, but also diversifying their economies. Because right now, if you look at trade, and the latest data that I could pull was from 2023, of the rare earth minerals alone, 3 billion of that went to China, 1.8 billion of that went to Russia, and only about 540 million of that went to the U.S. So they want to even that out so they're not dependent on any one of those great powers. So I think it's important to remember that we can talk about this from Washington's standpoint or Beijing's standpoint, but obviously this region gets a voice itself, and diversification is the message I'm getting from them, that they want to have more friends.
Okay, Mr. Chuan, given the Belt and Road investments that have already been embedded in this region, how realistic is the US-driven economic pivot? I know you're talking about diversification, how this is important, but obviously the Belt and Road Investment Initiative is actually one of the major things within Central Asia as well.
But in regards to the Belt and Road, is important not only for China but for Central Asia, because it will help preserving the ports and other fields, and this will polarize more job opportunities in these fields, and also to enhance economic ties between China and these countries. I think this is very important, not only for both parties, but also for the region. And also we know that there is Chinese investments in these countries that will attract and will help to provide the development opportunities between China and Central Asian countries. At the same time, as China contributed 30% of contributions in regard to economic secondary development, and I think Chinese development will contribute in attracting more development opportunities in these regions, and in return, I think China will benefit from this initiative. At the same time, in order to introduce, to protect peace of energy, the safety of energy, and others of other fields. So it's not only about economic and trade fields; it extends to geopolitical fields and other fields as well. I think the initiative is very important for China and for Central Asian countries.
Okay, Mr. Toth. Now, some analysts have described Washington's push as what they've said is transactional. Is this something that may be considered as a weakness or simply just realism in today's geopolitical world?
Yeah, I can understand why on the surface. It's a great question, by the way, that some people would argue it's transactional. But I think you have to look at the investment that Trump has been making in the region. Look, Kazakhstan all along has been closer to the West. It certainly had relations, for instance, with Israel since 1992. And Trump clearly was building on that behind the scenes in terms of trying to extend. And then the announcement that happened just before the summit began, that Kazakhstan was going to be joining the Abraham Accords along with the Arab nations to try and get a greater peace effort going in the Mideast as well as an economic forum. So I think it's not just transactional. There is geopolitical strategy at play here, and it's bigger than just Central Asia itself. It's about trade. It's about rare earth minerals. It's about messaging, as I said earlier, to Putin in Venezuela. And it's certainly about deepening investment coming from the Mideast. And you're seeing that. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE is heavily starting to invest in the different 5 countries that were at the summit. So, I think it's more than just transactional. It certainly is at certain elements of it. To get to the rare earth minerals, I would argue it's transactional. But I do think there's some strategic plays going on here that are above and beyond simple transactional moves in the immediate.
Okay, Mr. Chon, how do you interpret Kazakhstan's and Uzbekistan's role as diplomatic frontrunners during this process?
Actually, I think Central Asian countries will play a positive role in preserving peace in the field. And as I said previously, these countries are building the cooperation, and this organization plays a role in combating terrorism and extremism, which is very important. As we know, there is a large number of conflicts around the world, and I think the Central Asian countries are still having peace without any wars or conflicts. I think these countries will play an important role in preserving stability and security of China. Of course, will continue in enhancing countries with these countries for preserving peace and enhancing security, not only on trade and economy as only, but also in cultural fields and other fields, because this is very important for this region. Especially, we know that stability is the base of development. Without stability, these countries cannot fulfill developmental achievements. I think China is preparing to work with the Central Asian countries to preserve peace in the region.
Okay, thank you, Chu Chuan and Mark Toth, for your insights and for your valuable perspective on this very evolving regional equation. As Central Asia stands at the crossroads of great power rivalry, Washington's renewed interests may reshape or merely ripple the regional order. Time will tell whether this summit marks change or continuity. This brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank, which always unveils the complex world we live in. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.